Hello, and welcome to the Long Ways podcast. I'm Devin Windlespecht,
And I'm Michael Windlespeck.
and we're a father-son hiking duo out to hike the great long trails of Europe. Now, last time we left off, we were talking about the great days on the trail, but there's a flip side to that. And these are the bad days. These are actually the title of this episode, the worst day on the trail. Before we get into it, we wanted to bring you to the Dingle Way in Ireland. This was our third hike we did. We wanted to bring you specifically to this stretch between the town of Dingle and Duncan, about 3 days into the trail, that I believe proved to be one of the most challenging physically, especially weather-wise, also mentally on the trail. But before we start that, I want Dad to describe to us, why did we choose the Dingle Way to go hiking on? What is the Dingle Way?
So the Dingle Way has always been of interest to us because we've all been to Ireland. Devin lived there in Northern Ireland for a while, and I've been there several times to visit. Absolutely beautiful country, wonderful people. Having gone over the West Highland Way previously, we wanted to kind of stay there in the British Isles.
Yep.
There was just fantastic hiking. And so we chose this adventure in Ireland, and then come to find out, of course, the pandemic hits. So we have to
Yes.
back everything up a year. So
Yeah, I remember when we flew into Ireland, like being among the first Americans in the country. At this point, Europeans couldn't even make it to America. This was right in the middle of summer 2021. So the Dingle Peninsula, it's in like the far southern edge of Ireland, like
right,
the southwest corner. And
right.
it's actually an interesting area. It's one of the few places in Ireland where people still speak Irish and not English as a first language. It was also like a place that, especially Dingle and the surrounding towns, which is what we were hiking around, depended heavily on tourism. So you're not talking about Dublin or even Cork or some of the bigger towns, County Kerry. You're talking about like this place on the very, very edge of Ireland that's very rural. It's very tourism based. And honestly, it's one of the prettiest parts of Ireland, which is one of the prettiest countries in the world I've ever seen.
Yes. So we left Tralee, right? Okay, that was
Yep.
where
Just the
we
major town
left.
in the area.
Right, the major towns, kind of your starting and stopping point, depending on how you're doing the trail. But what was interesting is the fact that at that time, okay, there was basically it was a heat wave going on.
Yeah,
Okay,
a
we
massive
have
heat
this
wave.
ability. Yes, we have this ability to go places when crazy weather events are hitting, and it was probably the hottest it's been in Ireland, and they said 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so we hiking along and very, very exposed. Beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. You have a lot of kind of hedgerowy areas and stuff. It was brutally hot. Okay. And
Yep.
remember, we had just come off, this is into the pandemic. So
We
we were
weren't in our
not
best
exact.
shape.
No, we were not. We weren't training every day. We were all COVID,
Yeah.
isolationists and stuff. But anyway, so I mean, for me at least, it was really, really hard. At one point, I thought I had a version of like heat stroke type things, or
Yeah.
heat exhaustion, definitely. And I had to like sit underneath this tree while we covered me in water and stuff. And it was so hot, and we weren't prepared. We were ready for rain. We
We
thought we
were
were ready for rain.
we thought we were ready for rain.
We were expecting it to be cool, so we
Yep.
weren't really ready for the extreme heat. We did all of our research, and it wasn't supposed to be that hot. So it was hot, and it was a challenge. So it's that first day and a half, probably.
Well, by the end of the second day, we actually arrived or no, this would be the end of the third day. We arrived in Dingle. Dingle is like a really cool little town right on the coast. It's like an old fishing town, now much more tourism based. Not very many people. I'd say maybe less than 10,000 people, probably. We were actually in Dingle and people were like starting to tell us, oh, the weather's going to change tomorrow. And we were thinking, oh, thank God, we can finally like have a little bit of cool breeze, stop the heat.
For what
And
is supposed to be the most beautiful part of the Dingle Way,
I
right?
actually want to tell you what the guidebook says. I have it open right here about this part of the trail. From tranquil Venturi, a fine beach walk leads up to a varied traverse of the shoulder of Mount Eagle, with magnificent views over a dramatic coastline. Like that's what you want to hear from a day on a trail. That is like what you're looking at. You're like, this is going to be great. It's going to be one of the most beautiful days. It's just going to be good, easy walking. And none of that happened.
No. And you always hear people say too that there are no bad days on the trail. I'm going to challenge us on this one. Okay. Unfortunately, the bad day on the trail, this is what always sticks in our mind, was also supposed to be the most beautiful one and the one we're
Yep.
most looking forward to. And Eric's with us, who is this psycho photographer type guy, and he's wanting to see these pictures, and we we were challenged on every step of the way.
Yep.
From after we left Dingle. Yes.
Well, let's start with that. Like, so really, the day started off well. I remember this. We came out Dingle. It was actually nice. It was again, it was overcast. There was a nice breeze coming in. And we saw a group of actually the only other Americans there, a group of women. They were all probably middle-aged women who were also hiking it. And we had kind of leapfrogged across them over the previous 2 days. And they were some of the only other people hiking, I think, the trail at the time. So we started off, we kind of like follow kind of along the road for a while. Sometimes you have to do it with these kind of trails where coming out of the towns, you're walking along the highway. It's not that great, but as happened here, you kind of veer off afterwards. And as we're kind of like veering off, and then we kind of go up this, it was actually a really pretty view. We went up this hill that
Overlooking Ventry. Yes.
yes,
Yep.
it had hedgerows around the side. It has a beautiful view like down towards the sea and the Ventry Harbor. And Ventry was like a tiny, very, very small little fishing town, right along this like bowl-shaped, beautiful harbor. We stopped in. We were like, okay, well, we're gonna eat lunch along the trail, so we stopped in and we grabbed some stuff from the nearby market there. I remember just the first drops of rain starting to fall then, just like a small drizzle, and then the Irish being like, "Oh yeah, no, we're glad the weather's finally changed," and actually like seeming like very happy
Yeah.
that that it was raining. And I mean, I think at the time we were too, because we were like, "Oh yeah, nice, like it's gonna be cool. It's gonna be a nice cool day to walk." It wasn't really until we started to leave Ventry that things started to turn.
There was actually a wall of gray clouds, kind of
I
sitting there,
remember.
and it was kind of sitting up along the edges of Mount Eagle,
Yep.
and we're kind of watching it and thinking, okay, which way is it moving? You know how you all become like, amateur weathermen,
Yeah,
and we
exactly.
have our apps, we're looking at everything we have and everything. And by the way, we have rain gear. We're traveling with this after Scotland, the joy of taking on and off your rain gear every 15 minutes in Scotland.
Yeah.
We had rain gear. We saw the rain coming. We were actually looking forward to not being in the sun that day. And so we leave Ventry, and we're basically going to start to skirt the edge of Mount Eagle.
Mount Eagle, like there is one mountain on this trail we actually hiked. It was Mount Brandon.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of these like mountains around, but you usually like hike along the edge of them. And this one, which is why it was supposed to be so pretty, you hike along the edge and you just have the seed here left.
Right.
This would prove to be a problem. Let's put it that way. Having the seed to our left.
Yes, because the storm was coming from that
It's
direction.
funny. I actually looked at a
So
couple of photos of this beforehand, and I had like a couple of photos of us like hiking along Ventry Harbor, and you see like that black wall of clouds on the other side, which was funny to me to just see that. We came out of the harbor, and it's like maybe like a 2 mile walk along the harbor, and we were still pretty sheltered right then. We came up, and the rain just started pelting down. I remember, and like it started slow, and then it got worse and worse and worse. And we were kind of like hiking along these little roads, like between like two towns.
mhm.
Um, and I think it's when we got right at the foot of Mount Eagle that it just started to downpour. And I remember actually at the time we were kind of like, should we like sit and wait this out? And we kind of came to the conclusion like we didn't know, and we were right. We didn't know when this was going to end.
You also kind of pick like these little points because you have these maps in front of you and you say, oh, if we just make it to this next little town, we'll just stop there. But you don't realize the fact that many of them aren't towns. There's
No,
collections of 4 or 5 houses, right? They're
yeah,
not.
there's not like a cafe there you can use to wait it out or anything like that. It's just it is like six houses that people have called a town. And so then we began the long hike around Mount Eagle.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna profess to something here. I have a habit of saying that the next place we're supposed to go to is maybe 2 or 3 kilometers away.
Yes, it is a habit. Yes. Well, you vary between saying 2 to 3 kilometers or 45 minutes. Okay. So
45 minutes. Yes,
everything's
45
45
minutes.
minutes. If you ask Devin how long it's going to take us to hike to Thailand from where we're at, he'd say 45 minutes.
About 45
So
minutes. Yeah, exactly. Mile,
45
mile and a
minutes. Yeah.
half. In my defense, the guidebook, we always carry these guidebooks. Each of us, I actually have all of them on my bookcase. The funny thing about the guidebook I actually have in front of me right now is that it's weather damaged, specifically from this day. The guidebook is not very good about judging the distance, especially on this day. So I'm looking at the book and I'm like, yeah, it's gonna be wet. It's good, but we got like 45 minutes. We got maybe like 2 hours of hiking this. I think we hiked around this mountain for 4 to 5 hours minimum.
We had to have. Yes, this was one of our longest days when it really shouldn't have been. It should have been, the entire thing really should have been what, maybe 13 to 14 miles, right? I
Yep.
think. Yeah, I mean that was the idea. Even with the little bit of the detour, around Ventry, just before Ventry, 14 miles. That's not a bad day for us normally. Okay, that is normally, even with stops and everything, 6, maybe 7 hours at our pace. That's with
Yep.
decent stops, photography breaks, everything. So we're not hiking at some crazy rate, but this one we should have done it in 6 hours. I think it was well over 8
It
by the
was
time.
close to 9 by the time.
Yeah, yeah,
And
I agree.
I remember having sitting on these rocks, having just the saddest sandwich of my life that was like getting soaked as I was eating it. And then these crazy Irish people biking by in this downpour, just being like, great day for a hike, isn't it?
It
Biking
was.
by us, happy as can be. Again, the definition of a duck in water. Like
Yeah,
they
they
were
were.
just in their element, and we were just sitting there miserable.
This rain was relentless. Okay, it was not just, it wasn't like in Scotland where you're walking in and out of these basically showers.
No.
We had like one big day of rain in Scotland, that you got wet, obviously, and
Yeah.
we have decent rain gear, don't get me wrong, as I said, but it was really relentless. It was not yet. We were actually going to cross over one of the shoulders of Mount Eagle, and we were going to face these storms head on
Yeah.
into the wind. But at this point, it's just raining. The group of women we keep passing by is dwindling in number.
Yeah. Each one time it's like less and less.
Right, every time we're kind of leapfrogging, and then there's less and less of them as we go through.
I think by the time we hit
They
Mount
were they
Eagle,
were smart, by the way. I'm telling you right now, they were the smart ones. Okay, they
yeah,
went and called some sort of Uber or something and went back down the main road.
yeah.
So
Well, really, so we turn off the road. We have Mount Eagle. We start heading up. And as we're heading up, and this is why this was so hard. Rain's hard. Rain soaks you through. It's miserable. Even with good rain gear, eventually like stuff starts to get wet. I had actually given my because Eric had forgotten to, well, he hadn't forgotten. He didn't know where his rain cover was for his backpack, which has very, very it has a built-in rain fly we figured out later.
uh
But he hikes with camera equipment. But we start heading up. And there's something about Mount Eagle which would make, if it wasn't for this weather, it a beautiful hike. And it's the fact
oh
that you
yeah.
have on your right going straight up the mountain, and on your left going straight down into the sea.
Hmm.
On a day like today, that means two things. You have wind coming straight up from the sea, and you have wind coming straight down from the mountain. And you are right there in the middle. And as we're hiking, the temperature starts to plummet.
Especially when we started to get on the west side of the mountain. Okay.
Yes.
I remember we were hiking, we were getting wet. It was, we were basically, had our hoods up, and, we're, hiking in the rain, going over these stiles, by the way, which, this is, well, I only had, one knee replaced at this point, right? So
Yeah.
we're not even to the other one. And so going up and over these stiles, which are basically going ladders that get up and over the farmers' fences. So you're crossing
Yep.
these sheep pastures. There's not a lot of cover out there. Okay.
Yeah.
Every once in a while, there's a tree, very, very rarely in Ireland. So they were very slippery. Some of them were metal, some were wood. I don't know what some of them were at all. They were like a
Yeah.
slip and slides almost, So that was, you're constantly doing that. Okay. And then you get on their side and you start walking, but it was still always gradually up.
Yeah.
And we kept thinking we're heading down towards, the book kept giving this idea that we're going to keep heading down towards the sea. I guess we didn't ask which sea we were going towards. For
Yeah.
a while, I thought we were going to go over the mountain.
Yeah,
Okay,
exactly.
so
Well, also, we have gotten better at doing stuff like reading topographical maps and stuff. But at this time, we were still a little new to this. What we were doing actually is that we were going up and up and up and up of the shoulder. And then we thought at the
Mhm.
shoulder we were going to go down. But then you just kind of like go parallel along the sea. And as the temperature started to plummet from just the wind and the rain and like this weird mix we had, what would happen is that instead of the rain coming down on us, it would almost hit the mountain above us, be so cold that it would turn into like this sleet mix. Remember that?
Yes.
And then come just straight down the mountain right at us. Like if you looked up, you would just get hit in the face by like this wintry mix almost that you expect in like November, not July. And reminding you guys, it was like 90 degrees every day the day before.
Yes.
And all of a sudden you just hit with this in the face. Now, I was okay because my rain gear was a little bit better, but Dad and Eric honestly started to, especially Eric, started to get in almost danger territory with just being soaked and cold through.
Yeah,
Um,
he was getting towards hypothermia on
yeah,
him, which is ironic considering just 2 days before we were trying to bring my body temperature below like 600 or whatever the
yeah,
heck it was at that point.
exactly.
And
And
so I mean I use Patagonia gear and I love it, but it was very much more something for just keeping the water off you. It was not insulated.
yeah,
Okay, because it was July and we were not making any huge elevation changes. That's the important thing. When we're saying we're going up, this is really only about a 500 meter to 600 meter mountain. It's not, we're not going to 8,000 feet or anything like that, right?
exactly.
It's pretty steep up and down because we're coming right off the water, but it's not Mont Blanc, right? There's no glaciers on this thing or anything like that, so it's just right there by the ocean. But yeah, so it is cold. And the one thing we normally try to do is like once an hour or so we usually stop, just because for a lot of reasons. One, we want
Yeah,
to take photos. Okay. Second, it's just actually slow down our walking. We've gotten better about that. We're not in a rush to get anywhere, although
yep,
that day we were. um but we stopped even stopping
yep.
because the moment you stop, the cold set in. And I know what Devin's describing. You're saying to yourself, I know something about meteorology, and there's no way there was water blowing up and down the mountain at the same time. I would beg to differ. Okay.
Yeah.
It was happening. We were staying there for it. And if you go hike the Dingle Way, okay, maybe you get to experience it too.
I think it
Okay.
was it was something weird about how the wind was, I think, actually like hitting the mountain. We just got trapped in just like that just absolutely awful weather. We had actually one break where we were like pressed up against the rocks. Like using it was like the wind shelter, not from the sea where the rain was supposed to be coming from, but from the sleet coming from the top of the mountain onto us. We maybe took that break for like 10 minutes, maybe not even, because again, once you stopped walking, like you started getting cold real fast.
We actually learned from the sheep, remember? They would
Oh
hide
yeah,
up in these little rock. We're like, hey, they're pretty smart.
yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
Because normally, every place else we've been, the sheep will stand out there in the middle of the weather, like, I'm a sheep. I really don't care. But these were all huddled up against these. I'm like, the sheep are huddling.
Yep.
This is not good. And it was a dreary gray because we were in the clouds. So now you can't even stop and go look and see where the sea was at. It was
Yeah.
just one giant sheet of gray. You're passing past these cocons. They're these circular houses that were built by original occupants in the area.
Beehive huts is what they would call them. They're
Yes,
shaped like a
exactly.
beehive.
And our plan was to actually hike down there and go see them, because you could. Okay, you could take a little trail down to them, and it was down. Okay.
Hmm.
And we also had planned on hiking down a couple of times down to the water itself, right?
Yeah.
And taking some photos down there. Eric's an amazing photographer. Devin and I like to, take videos and stuff like that. We didn't stop. It was rough. I wanted to add one more thing here. What was making this even more difficult was, in many of the trails are very, very well marked. Okay. And so you have your trail signs and stuff like that. Remember, we're the first Americans there. This trail has not been heavily traveled in a couple of years for
Yeah.
any tourism. And large parts have been grown up. So we didn't really know where there was a trail. And we're walking through bramble, basically.
Yeah. It
Okay.
was like these
Um,
ferns area. I
the
remember.
ferns, yes, the
Yeah.
ferns everywhere, which collect water, which is great.
Yeah.
So
That
now,
soak
every
into
time you
your
rub up,
boots.
it's soaking in your boots, right? So that's what you want is walking through plants. Okay, so because get even more wet, and we'd have to basically aim for these stone walls. Okay, on the other side of the pastures. And as we got across there, we'd have to look around for the sign. And every time we got to their side, we thinking, okay, it's time we start descending. The sign would point up.
Yeah,
It
exactly.
was always going to the right. We don't want to go to the right. We might go to the left. Right. We want to go back down the road, and we couldn't get there. So
I will
uh,
say
uh,
this though, at the very end, well, we still had about 2 miles to go afterwards, which was painful. Um, at the very end, it kind of spits you out at this overlook of this place called Kuminul Bay.
mhm.
And we couldn't actually, poor Eric, we couldn't really stop to take uh photographs because like Eric's gear would have just gotten destroyed by the wind and water. But it did spit us out at one of the prettiest views on that entire trail. You had like this circular bay. Remember, you had like that peninsula
Yep.
jutting right off into the water,
Hmm.
and it was something actually about like the colors that came from like the storm by then was like not breaking, but like had lessened in intensity, and you had like this beautiful like dark blue into turquoise along the beach, these like rocky beaches, and I took one of the best photos of the entire trail at the end of the probably one of the worst days of that trail. But also towards the end, and Eric would disagree, but he was um a little bit more medically in danger than you and I. I think that there came a certain part of this, and I always tell people this, where it's almost so bad that it almost becomes funny. Almost, you're almost laughing about it because I think there's a point where you kind of on days like, and again, it's different if you're like actually like you need to get into shelter or else you might have a problem like Eric had. But for me at least, like there's probably a point halfway through Mount Eagle where I was pretty much on the opinion that like I could just be miserable this entire trip, or I could be miserable and kind of laugh at myself about it. Like you see like the trail go up when it's supposed to go down, and instead of being angry about it, you just go, all right, here we go again. You just kind of put
Exactly. It,
one
it did
boot
become
in
funny.
front of the
It
other.
did. Yep.
um,
Yeah, and I think when we got to the top and we're looking down at Dunquin and we realized we still had about our 2 hours, it was still raining. We were
uh-huh.
soaked through, but I don't know. It did become funny.
Yeah.
Okay, it just was okay.
Well,
Well,
tinged with the
this is
worry for
gonna
Eric,
have to.
but and remember, so we were just to cap a day off. We wanted nothing more to walk into our bed and breakfast and have just some really nice, warm food, a welcome. We're not going to name any names. We're not going to bad talk anyone. All we can
It
say
was a
is
wonderful place.
it was a wonderful pace, Duncan. And we got a no food or warm beverages or anything kind of welcome at like 8 o'clock because we had missed dinner or something like that. At the end of a long day. And I remember all of us just sitting there soaked to the bone in our room, just being like, well, what now? Just
Right.
just the most miserable because we thought there was going to be a pub that we could go eat at. Remember?
With the most westernmost pub in
Europe.
all of Europe.
Yep.
Okay. Okay.
Um,
And it closed because of COVID. So there was no place to eat in this town.
no, and we were thinking we are like,
Anywhere.
are we gonna have like Cliff Bars for dinner tonight? But that night actually ended all right. Remember, we managed to find a bus, and we took a bus to, like a nearby town, which we actually end up hiking past, and we like had like actually a very nice meal in a hotel up there. I don't know if it was the best meal on the trail, but for me, it was one of the best meals just to have like a beer and warm food at the end of that such a long day. So that was the worst day on the trail. Dad, what I guess my question for you is for people who have to experience like these days on the trail happen. They're just going to happen. You can't avoid them. What's your recommendation for people to get through them, really?
I think it's a good point. First of all, is you'll hear us all say this all the time. We keep saying we're novices, but we have been doing this and we do prepare. Okay, we did prepare for weather. The extremes were a little unique to Ireland at this, even to the Irish were saying that it doesn't usually do either of these at this time of year. But try to be prepared. Try to know where your out points are as well. When can you get down to, even if it's a cluster of houses or something, to get some sort of shelter. That's it. But the big thing is on the trail really comes down to keeping yourself hydrated all the time, no matter
Yeah.
what. Okay, but also it's mental. It really is. It's a mental thing. It's and to stop and enjoy it. I mean, we did a couple of times, and I know that sometimes I was doing it too. I was just stopping and standing there, in the wind and the rain, and even though it was miserable, I'm probably not going to be there again.
Yeah.
Right. I'm probably not going to be, who knows? Maybe we hike it again. Maybe we don't, who knows? But, I'm not going to be there again. And I traveled across the world and, in a pandemic to see this, and I want to see it. And the memory to me is, of course, not the one you find in the tourist books, but it is the worst day on the trail. Okay. It can still be a fun day. Okay.
Or at
Sometimes
least a
it's not.
memorable one.
I was going to say, sometimes it's not a fun day till you look back now 2 years later. At the
Yeah.
time, it probably the fun factor was a little lacking. Okay, okay, but it's a mental thing. Remember why you're there. Soak in the surroundings. Look at things and
Literally in this case.
literally soaked. Yeah, I was soaking about 600 gallons of water. It was funny because we actually took a down day in Dunquin, and to prepare ourselves, we went back
We went
to
back to
Dingle,
Dingle.
okay, because we had to go find someplace, bus the next day to go find someplace to eat, and we went to a store. We bought insulated rain gear,
Yeah.
right? Which I will now mention we did not need ever again on
No.
that on the trail. So now we had insulated rain gear. We never had another problem like this at all. It was just some crazy storm coming in. Uh, yeah, it was mentally. How about you, Devin?
Well, I think the first one, and this was a little bit on us, is that yeah, the weather was like pretty extreme, like either really hot or kind of cold. It's okay to over prepare for these. You know, eventually you're gonna find out like what you need or don't need, but like if you're going somewhere like Ireland or Scotland, do that. Bring the insulated rain pants. You never know. You're gonna be happier knowing, like I'm not saying to overpack, but you're gonna be happier knowing that you have what you need for this and like do your research ahead of time. Like, will you have like -40-degree days in Ireland during the summer? Yeah, you're gonna have that. And you have to research that ahead of time. So keeping that in mind, preparing ahead of time. For me, the second thing is to kind of realize the difference between you being miserable and you being in danger. Those are two very different things. In our case, Dad and I were miserable, but we were not in danger. Eric was not quite in danger yet, but that was towards the end. We had to realize he's at a point where if we don't get into shelter and we don't get on moving soon, he might actually have some problems.
I agree.
So, but just because I think the answer I have is just because you're miserable doesn't mean that you necessarily have to leave the trail. Leave the trail if you're in danger. Leave the trail if, it's actually like I feel like I could get hurt or get sick or something like that. Like do not mess with that kind of stuff. That you have to trust your gut instincts on that.
But also remember, leave the trail if you're not mentally prepared to move forward,
Yeah.
because that's when things start to get dangerous. We were not in any real danger from the terrain, but going up and down over these stiles, if you're not focusing, it would be so easy to slip and twist an ankle or something like that. You have to really be focusing on, the rocks are wet, the landscape is wet, obviously, and so mentally you need to be present on the trail. Okay.
Yeah, I
No
agree with
matter
that.
what the weather is. Yep.
I mean, but my thing is I'm not like one of those people who's like the misery is part of the fun. It's not. The misery is just miserable. But part of the trail also, and we can talk about this later with Portugal with Dad, where like the last couple of days were really hard for us, but Dad went through and he did it. And part of some of these days are being able to look at yourself and say 2 or 3 years down the line and say, I could have left that mountain halfway through. I could have left and grabbed a taxi and gone. And this is different also if like you have something like Dad did before where he had like chronic pain with his knees where he actually couldn't physically hike the next day.
Yeah.
But if you are able, it's part of the story. Those miserable days, those bad days are part of the trail story. And I kind of want to like let people know that. Like if you're hiking these trails, let yourself have the bad days. If a bad day happens, put it in your head, check it off, and say, this day sucks. Check. Okay.
Yep.
Let's get to the end of it.
Yep.
And I'm going to look back later and feel so proud of myself for having done that trail day because of that. Again, that doesn't mean that if you're in any kind of medical danger or if you're actually physically or mentally unable to do so, like know your limits. But if you feel like it's within your limits, do it. You'll be thankful you did it. And I think it's the thing. Like, would we hike the Dingle Way again, even the same weather with the same conditions, in a heartbeat?
Oh
100%.
yes, absolutely. Yes.
Because when else are you like out there in like the along the Atlantic Ocean in Ireland, just hiking through the scenery? And I mean, again, if we had left the trail that day, like one of the prettiest days in Ireland was the next day, and we would have missed that too. I think that's it for this episode of the Long Ways podcast. Once again, I'm Devin Windospect,
And I'm Mike Winslbeck.
and this is the Long Ways podcast. Thank you for listening.